Okay, guess what? More Christmas. Who doesn't love Christmas? Okay, so today, out of the Great Granny Storybook, we're going with How Granny Got Her Magic Wand. A family favorite with those older kids, let me tell you. And let me take these things off. It's one of those things. These pages. I don't know who bound this book. Anyway, here, just a moment. So, Twinkle had a problem. Even with her magic wand to whisk things into files, it was too much for her. Reports of good deeds and bad deeds kept coming in too fast, and they had to be read and sorted before they could whisk into the right files. So she was like 6.5 rooms behind in her work. Every year there were more and more children to keep track of. Even with all her fairies to help her, she couldn't see how she could catch up. "Santa," she said, "what on earth are we going to do? We're going to help keep the files in order. Mark won't be able to help the good kids from the bad kids next season. Won't be able to tell." Anyway.
Well, perfectly simple, said Santa. We call in an expert. Now, let me see. What kind of expert could we get for this job? Yeah, I know. An accountant would do nicely.
"Accountants cost a lot of money," said Mrs. Claus in a worried tone. "And remember, we've always used magic instead."
"Oh, they'll settle for magic if they got any brains at all," said Santa.
And off he went into his office to find an accountant and phone him up. So about an hour later, he came out quite provoked.
"Well, I never. I don't know what this world's coming to. I phoned several highly reputable firms and were perfectly courteous. I told them I was, explained my problems, and said I'd be glad to give a magic wand to the man who could solve my problem for me. Well, they certainly are an odd bunch. One told me to go count my marbles, although I failed to see where our marble inventory comes into it at all. Another called me Grandpa and said magic wands were fully depreciated 1,000 years ago. And the last one had the effrontery, well, that's a weird one tonight, to tell me where to go sober up and stop wasting his time. The modern age is so full of smart alecks it makes me sick." With that, he slumped into his chair, quite discouraged. "Now, Santa," said Mrs. Claus, "I know it's upsetting. You just got some oddballs that don't believe in magic. I understand it's fairly common among grown-up mortals."
"That's right," said Tinkle. "Only a country on earth where a fairy gets any sort of recognition is in Ireland."
"Well, then it's simple enough," said Mrs. Claus. "I'll just go through the older people's files until you find one that's an accountant that believes in magic." Well, finally, on the evening of the 4th day, they came across a file all covered in dust. It was so old. The file was the file of an old arthritic grandmother who was an accountant and did believe in fairies. And they banged the worst of the dust off the file and they rushed it to Santa. And everyone was so pleased because it'd been a horrible job, and, looking through all those old dusty files. And they'd just about given up.
"Here you go, Santa," said Twinkle. "I don't think this accountant will be rude to you."
Well, Santa looked up gravely, took the file, he started, took the pages, and sneezed from all the dust.
"Oh, my goodness, this certainly is an old file. She should have lots of experience."
And he started to read the file, and he said, "She wasn't a perfectly good little girl. I see here she broke her brother's airplane one time, and what's this? She shaved her eyebrows off. But over here, I see she did the dishes, although it was dreadfully slow, but she tended her baby sister, and she used to make pies for a lady with a crippled hand. Well, I'd say that's about average, Now let's see, later on she played accordion for a Sunday school, and she tried to be a good mom, although she was short-tempered at times. And look here, she never gave up believing in me," says Santa. "Now there's a sensible woman. And over here, not only does she love doing things for her grandchildren, which, of course, but she took lollipops to these poor kids in Fort Nelson who never saw jumbo-sized lollipops before." Now, this was like 1967, I think these stories were written, or before. So, yeah, probably in 1967. But now you go uptown to the Red Apple, they got some big-ass lollipops in Fort Nelson, BC. Don't you worry, lollipop lovers. Anyway, and she tells the kids all about fairies and the leprechauns and me. And by Jove, I think I'll phone her, says Santa. And he got straight to the phone and dialed Nicholson's accounting.
Hello, Granny, said Santa. This is Santa at the North Pole. I'm way behind in my filing, and I just gotta get caught up. I can't pay you in money, but I got a spare magic wand, and if you could come help me. My goodness, said Granny. I certainly never thought you'd need help, but I sure could use a magic wand, she says. I get awfully jammed up with files myself every tax season, but we all just work and work until all of a sudden it's done like magic. I'm afraid our magic is more hard work than wishing. Yeah, you're perfectly right. All magic is, says Santa. It's true. Like this old trick even, Doesn't impress you kids? No. Anyway, you poor bastards. Anyway, now Santa says, I'm sure you'll do nicely. Now, if you what do you say? You come up for a few days, and I'll send Rover, our airplane, is available because the reindeer are too busy. They're on their summer holidays there. Well, Granny gave her relief because she was not too fussy about going up to the North Pole in an open sleigh with the arthritis, no matter, it would not be good. Well, she says, I believe it'll be all right 2 weeks from Tuesday, she says. And then they lined it all up. And then Granny went to the airport and she was all bundled up for the North Pole with her briefcase and her adding machine and some all-day suckers, for the little elves too. And sure enough, Rover was waiting. And she went down to in her seat, and in no time they were at the North Pole, where Santa and Mrs. Claus, Sparky and Twinkle and Tapper were all being. Hope I don't do worse. Anyway, they were just as curious about Granny as Granny was about them. Only those who went outside, from the North Pole could talk to the kids, if you even knew it, mortals. Well, it says here everyone was very nice, but Twinkle looked terribly worried. And she ran over and whispered in Santa's ear, and Santa looked grave. But being Santa, he wasn't very tactful, so he came right out with it. I'm afraid we got a problem. We got a magic wand here, but Twinkle says you're far too old and not nearly pretty enough to be a fairy. It's just, well, Santa, says Mrs. Claus, that's a terror. No, he's right, says Granny. I never was pretty enough to be a fairy, and not even when I was a young girl, and I was worried about you're getting the good kids and bad kids mixed up, so it isn't everyone that gets here. And I've done with magic long enough. I don't suppose I'll do too badly without it. And now that'll never do, says Mrs. Claus. Twinkle, there's absolutely no reason she can't be a witch. We got an opening for the Wild Witch of the North ever since Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz destroyed the last one. I'm sure she'll be a good witch. She's bound to be an improvement over the last one for sure, she says with a shudder. Well, I suppose that would work, he turned to Granny. Now you realize that as long as you only do good things for other people, you'll stay a good witch. But the minute you do something for yourself or frighten little children, you'll turn into a bad witch. And you grow a big wart on the end of the nose. And no tricks, mind you. We had one of those that almost turned me into a frog. And I'll have none of that stuff. Santa wouldn't say that, I don't think. Well, my goodness, said Santa. No accountant would want word that they're doing books for a frog, so don't you worry about that. I would ruin my professional standing, she says. And even if I'm not pretty enough to be fairy, I don't want a wart on the end of my nose, she says. So Santa and Granny Santa had Granny kneel down and gently tapped her forehead with the magic wand and said, "Rise, Wild Witch of the North," and handed her the magic wand. Oh my goodness, says Granny. Do I gotta ride a broomstick now? I'm sure I'd never be able to balance and it'd just be hell on my arthritis, she says. At this, everyone laughed, and Twinkle explained, oh, no self-respecting witch ever rides a broomstick anymore. They ride around in jet-propelled broomsticks that look like airplanes. You just close your eyes and wish you're there, and just like an old-fashioned broomstick, there you are. But they're ever so much more comfortable. Well, Granny was certainly relieved, for she was at an age where comfort was quite important. And well, that's good. Now let's this ain't getting those files sorted out. You better take me to them. And so they did. And Granny was horrified with the amount of filing to done. Letters were coming in so fast it took the fairies all their time just catching up with them and setting them in sacks. Good heavens, Granny thought to herself. They'll never keep it up this way. Santa, you got to convert to an automatic filing system like the IBM. They're a big computer company, even back in them days, And they'll release most of your fairies for other work once they get it going. She goes, oh, that's a wonderful idea, said Santa. We can certainly use those fairies. Why, the Barbie doll department is just hopelessly overworked, and if you could manage that, that'd be a tremendous help. So just do it the way you think is best, because Santa's smart, he's a good manager. So Granny fixed it up so every child had a code number. And as the report came in, they came right to the synchro punch machine in the code. Man, that is some old-timey technology, the synchro. Look that shit up on your YouTubes. Anyway, the synchro punch machine in code. And then the other machine sorted everything out. The good deeds came out with white cards with blue dots, sometimes for extra good deeds and rarely sparkles around the edges for extra thoughtful or kind deed, yeah. And then the bad deeds came out in green cards with black blotches for really horrible deeds. And then the fairies just waved their magic wands and the sorted cards flew into their own files. And this way you only had to peek in a file to see if there was more white cards than green cards, and that kid was okay. Well, being human, Granny had to test the system, and she chose her grandchildren's files to make sure they were doing okay. Sure enough, they were. I didn't use magic, says Granny. She just worried about that, getting that wart, you know, the thing. Well,
oh, that's perfectly all right, says Twinkle. You checked them. You didn't change them. Even if you don't call it magic, it certainly works better than magic. I think it's wonderful.
Well, everyone was so pleased. Things were neat and orderly again. Well, I think you better come up a couple times a year, says Santa, just to be sure we never get behind again. It certainly helps to know we got these wonderful modern inventions to help. Well, said Granny, I certainly enjoyed my visit, but I've got to get back. Even my own files will be all stacked up again, she said. Anyway, I got to say goodbye for now. As you wish, says Santa. Now remember, take good care of that magic wand, and don't leave it where little children could pick it up by mistake, or they could make a horrible mess. It would take ages to straighten out. Oh, it's not a toy, you know. Oh, I know, said Granny. I'm a little afraid of it myself. I'll only use it for very small magic until I get used to it. That's the idea.
Oh, that's the idea, said Twinkle. Take it easy and you'll have the hang of it in no time.
And by that time, the rover was waiting, and Granny said goodbye and anxious to get back to her grandchildren, try out that magic wand. Now, I got a picture. If you don't believe the story of Granny's magic wand, all you got to do to see Granny's real magic wand, it was given to Auntie Bree after it was given to my mom and then to Auntie Bree. So she is now the Wild Witch of the North, and if you want to see that, you track her down. I'm sure she'd show it to you for a small fee. Anyway, you guys take care. I love you. Merry Christmas.